Hello everyone, my name is Alice and I will be your tour guide throughout the beautiful Prague Jewish quarter, or actually what's left of it. Again, my name is Alice, I'm a licensed tour guide and state licensed tour guide, and I also have a special license from a Jewish museum. And on top of that, I grew up right here. You can basically throw a stone to my grandma's place. Okay, right next to Kafka's birthplace. I will show you in a minute, and I'm going to wear this. I'm very sorry, but I tested, so I'm sure you can hear me well. We are still practicing social distancing, so we are all stuck with the face masks, but we are responsible, right, for each other. So behind me, there is a gorgeous statue of Moses by František Bílek. František Bílek was an architect, he was a sculptor, and he was also a mystic. He built he lived at the turn of the last century, and he built gorgeous villa as a studio and his residence, and next to the Prague castle. But it's a different tour, so let's start with the Old-new Synagogue. The Old-new Synagogue is the oldest continuously active synagogue in the world. Can you imagine? And yes, in case you're wondering, it was active also during the World War II. Only short interruption for not even 2 years. So let me turn and yes, now you see the north side of it, and it is not actually, it was not the first documented synagogue built in the Jewish quarter. The first one was called Old Shul, a 10th century synagogue, which is not longer in existence, so I cannot show you, unfortunately, but I will show you the next best thing. You see here the back of it, okay, and the last quarter of the 13th century, late 1200s. You can see thick walls still bordering the Romanesque architecture, but if you notice the arched windows, they have a little tip on top, which tells us those are in Gothic style, so old Gothic. So now we are going around the southern side, where is the entrance to the synagogue. The synagogue is still active. The Prague's Jewish community, and not only the Prague's Jewish community, is using it during Shabbat and during the holidays. Here is the main entrance, but also we have many visitors from all over the world joining the services. During the day, the Old-new Synagogue doubles as a museum, so anyone can visit. The only thing, the gentlemen, they have to wear their kippas, because there is still Torah present there in Aron Kodesh, which is a sacred ark for the Torah. You see the facade. It's a typical Gothic facade, old Gothic, nothing like the Gothic Nouveau spires of St. Vitus Cathedral or Notre Dame in Paris. So you see spikes there, and there are exactly 12 spikes there. Yeah, can you see? 12. Wow, 12. It's a magic number. It's very important number for the Jewish communities all over the world, because it symbolizes 12 tribes of Israel, or 12 sacred rivers. See, numerology is very important during the Middle Ages, so not only the Jewish landmarks are marked by numerology woven in them. And if you tell me, Alice, what are you talking about, there are only 11, you are actually wrong. The top one is conjoined of 2, so you have to count it twice. Yes? Also, the middle nave You have 12 windows all around. 12 windows all around. Again, the magic number. Now I will show you the bottom. You see that there is the bottom floor. It's kind of adjacent to the middle building, and it is an addition, and it was added for the ladies, because we know in Orthodox Judaism the ladies cannot really worship together with a man. Why? That's a question. There are many theories for that. Every community uses his own. The wicked tongues, they say that we can't shut up for 5 minutes, right? So we would disturb the gentleman. I'd like to think that we are way too gorgeous for the man to concentrate when we are present during the prayers. But my friend Kohan, actually, he told me, honey, you're wrong. And I told him, how dare you? No, I didn't. So I said, well, tell me the real reason. He said, well, show me in Talmud or in Torah somewhere written down that the girls cannot come in. I said, well, you're right. The only thing written there is that you actually are welcome, but you don't have to bother, right? Yes, because we, ladies, we are sacred. We are sacred being. We produce life for 9 months, and then we sacrifice in pain, giving birth, and then you can feed your baby with your own product, with your own milk, right? So even during the hard times, your baby survives and is comfortable. We are nurturing creatures. So we are already there. We don't have to try hard. God already loves us. The boys, on the other hand, they have to prove they are worthy. Well, joking aside, you can take your pick. You can take, I like this theory the most, so you can take your pick. Now, old, new. Let's go back. Old, new, huh? It's an oxymoron, almost, yeah. Is it old or is it new? Can it be both? Well, the story is this. The legend says that during the 13th century, angels were worried about the sacred stones, the sacred rubble from the Second Jerusalem Temple, and they needed to bring it to safety. So they chose the center of Judaism for the Central Europe. They chose Prague, and we were in desperate need of the new synagogue because the old shul was already pretty much full. So they brought the rubble here, and they say, oh, don't get too excited. You have it on condition. Al Tanai in Hebrew. Al Tanai is on condition. Al Tanai. So, yes, that was the name, on condition, Al Tanai. But almost no one spoke ancient Aramaic. The Hebrew was kept for religious purposes. So, people spoke archaic Czech, and then later on, because we were run by Habsburgs for so many years, from the beginning of the 16th century, all the way up till to 1918, when the Hungaro-Austrian Empire got abolished. So the German muddled with ancient, with archaic Czech, and Yiddish was born. So people spoke Yiddish in here, and from Al Tanai became Alt Neu, Old New, Old New. It's a mistake, but we all use it because it's stuck with it. So mystery solved. Now you know about the name. That's one of the theories, of course. Probably the old shul was here first, so this was called new, and then later, when newer synagogues were built, it was called the Old New. Again, you can take your pick. That's why I love history, because it's just great. Now what we have here, slowly we got to the cemetery. The Jewish cemetery was actually active. The first grave was here ever since 1439. Avigdor Kara was buried here. He was a writer, and he chronicled the biggest pogrom of Jewish community here in Prague and small communities around. Can you imagine? 7,000 people were massacred in one day. during Easter Sunday, on Easter Sunday in 1389. Avigdor Kara survived the pogrom for 50 years, and thanks to him we are able to know the details about it. You see, I'm standing on the street, but those gravestones are really, really high up. So how that's possible? Well, let's continue so I can show you the back entrance and of the cemetery, and you can see the gravestones a little bit closer. So obviously now the cemetery is closed, the Old-new Synagogue is closed, basically the entire Jewish museum is closed. But so I cannot show you inside, but at least we can do this. The next best thing, when you come to Prague physically, not virtually, you will be able to visit yourself and maybe remember some things I have told you today. Of course, we have only 30 minutes, so let's do this. Okay, can you see the gravestones? Yeah, I'm just sticking my phone through this beautifully designed ornate wrought iron back gate. Okay, you see all the gravestones are huddled together. It's not because the people were cremated or they are so close together. They are actually in layers. So can you imagine if you have limited space, and why you had limited space, why wouldn't you purchase another lot? It's because there were rules ever since 1215, which was the Fourth Lateran Council in the Holy Roman Empire, and they established a new legislation. Rules were imposed upon the Jewish communities. One of them was no ownership of land. Yes, no ownership of land. So if you were Jewish, you couldn't buy land, and if you cannot buy another lot, then you have to go in layers, because no cremation, no exhumation in Jewish culture. So those gravestones are so close together because they are from different layers. Yeah, so the bodies are in layers and the stones were risen from the bottom layers all the way up. So you can find Gothic stone next to the, you see, cemetery is quite large. This is still a fortification wall, So you can find Gothic stones next to the Renaissance stones, next to the Baroque stones, and they would be centuries apart. How many layers? Who would tell you? No excavation in the sacred ground. So we think that is anything between 10 to 12 layers, and graves, the estimation is 12 to 17,000, not the bodies, because families were buried together. For example, ladies, they do not have their own separate stone. Ladies were buried with their husbands. Yeah, so the stones you see there, almost all of them are for men. Sometimes the ladies, they had a special section, you know, the stone was kind of double. Like the two stones for 10 Commandments, that shape, and the husband was on one side and the wife was on the other side. There are only two exceptions in the cemetery, as we know. One is Rivka Tiktiner. Rivka Tiktiner, if you know Martha Stewart, she was a Renaissance Martha Stewart. She was a scholar, she was a writer, she wrote books about how, for young ladies, guidebooks, you know, how to treat a husband properly, how to properly clean your household for Seder, and so on. And she has her own grave there, her own gravestone. She's buried alone. And also another lady who was the first Jewish noble lady. Can you imagine? Her husband was the first Jewish nobleman. His name was Mr. Bashevi. Yeah? And Mr. Bashevi lived at the beginning of the 17th century, and he became the first Jewish nobleman, called Jacob ben Bashevi von Treuenberg. Now, and his wife, of course, has her own grave. So now we see the town hall. Yeah? That's the Jewish town hall. Obviously, now we do not need a town hall. I don't have to tell you that Jewish town, it's not longer in existence. Prague is integrated, so if you live here, not necessarily you need to be Jewish by default, but still, a lot of members of the community, they chose to be close to the only active Orthodox synagogue. Again, this is the Old-new. The Jewish town hall is next to it. You see the gray and white facade. It's a Baroque facade, but the back tells you this was built during the Renaissance time, to be exact, 1567 by Mordecai Mazal, who was a mayor of a Jewish quarter that time. Now on top you see two clocks. Yeah? On the Baroque spire you see, hold on a second, I lost it. Okay, perfect. I'm not the greatest cameraman in the world. Sorry about that. So, on top you see Baroque spire with a clock which is kind of ordinary, and below it you see clock which has, instead of Roman numerals, it has Hebrew letters. Yeah? So no numbers, but letters. Each Hebrew letter has also numerical value. So 12 is 12 and so forth. And we know that we read from and write from right to left in Hebrew. So obviously the clock is running counterclockwise. If you check the time is off there, but it's not, because it runs the opposite way. If you would put a mirror right in the middle of it, of the Hebrew clock, then it would show you in the mirror the right time. Okay, but even if you're Jewish, I assure you, you're pretty confused. It's not easy to read the time there. So, because our brain is wired just to see the picture. So, we kept another clock there just to be on the same page. Okay, perfect. Now we are going to see Mazal Synagogue. The Mazal Synagogue was built by who else than Mordecai Mazal, who was, now you see a little bit more of the town hall. Yeah, it's beautiful Baroque facade and an entrance. We still use the town hall, but it's not called a town hall anymore. It's a Jewish community center. On top, I'm trying to focus, you see Star of David with something there which looks like a crown, but it is not a crown, it's a hat. Remember I told you about the rules that were imposed upon the Jews during centuries and centuries. So one of them was no ownership of land, another one was, for example, to wear this pointy cone-shaped yellow hat with a pom-pom on it, just to distinguish yourself when you went outside and you went to the other quarters, like the old town, lesser town, maybe new town. You needed to distinguish yourself to show that you are Jewish. And life gives you lemons, we make lemonade, right? So it became almost like a logo, symbol for the Prague Jewish town. So only here you see not only plain Star of David, but you see the hat there. I'm trying to show you on the way these gorgeous Art Nouveau, Art Deco buildings. They are all brand new for us, built around the turn of the last century, so almost nothing here is older than 1900s, obviously, except the landmarks that I'm showing you now. So, why? Because remember, no ownership of land. That was abolished with the Holy Roman Empire dissolving and Hungaro-Austrian Empire forming, with a new constitution in 1867. Finally, Jewish people were allowed to buy land again, and you can imagine, poof, everyone left and bought a house elsewhere. So what happened to the ghetto? Some synagogues were kept active, like the Old-new, the Mazal Synagogue, and so forth, but many of them derelict with the town. No one took care of the houses, so I guess people didn't care because they were stuck here long enough. So the city, by the turn of the century, last century, I'm talking about turn from the 19th to the 20th century, was so run down that the static decided to tear it down. The city cleaned the space. They left only the buildings that they were kept active and taken care of. And the new luxurious neighborhood grew here. If you look at this, look at those houses. Those are apartment buildings, yes? So almost like a phoenix from the ashes, right? So and now it's one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in Prague. Karma, karma. I promised you that I'm going to show you where Kafka was born, and because whatever is left from the old ghetto is all huddled around my street, the Mazal Street. We're gonna be right there pretty soon. The building was not here when Kafka was born. We know that Kafka was born in 1883, so the apartment was basically gone by the beginning of the 20th century, but very similar building at the same spot was built, so I can show you at least the sites, yes? So now we are here. You see in front of us there is a yellow building and a green building. Green building on the right and yellow building, those are not it. This corner here, the first tall building that you see. In front of you you have a balcony, and below the apartment, the corner apartment, that's where Kafka was born. And he even has a bust here. It's kind of hard to, you can see his profile there, right there. And this square is called Kafka Square, Franz Kafka Square, and he also has a museum here. So another reason why to come to Prague, right? To see Kafka's museum. And I grew up right there. You see the top floor? That's my grandma's place. So right next to Kafka. See, I didn't mystify you when I told you I'm really, really local. And when I was growing up here, I was mainly with my grandma because both of my parents were working and she was raising me. And one day she was sleeping late. She was a party girl. And I decided to go exactly through this route that I'm taking you now for a walk. I was bored, and there was a junk store here. You know, this type of antiques, which are not really antiques. Someone's junk is someone else's treasure. So this gentleman who was running the store, he saw me and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going for a walk." He said, "No, I'm going shopping." "No, you're staying here with me." And to keep me in his place, he started to tell me stories about Rabbi Lev, who was a contemporary of Mordecai Mazal and his friend. He actually administered the Old-new Synagogue during the same time, the second half of the 16th century. He was a scholar, philanthropist, really a pillar of the community. He's still world famous, but maybe not as Rabbi Lev, but as Maharal. It's another nickname of his. Maharal is abbreviation in Hebrew of our teacher, yes, of our teacher, because he was a scholar. Also, he was a scholar. He was a writer, and he was fluent in the Kabbalah. So many legends were written about him, and perhaps the most famous one is about Golem, about Prague's Golem. You see restaurant at the Golem, and now I will show you how Golem looked, because he's right here. You see the mosaic? Okay, wait a second. You see the mosaic right there? It looks like a man, rudimentary, kind of a rudimentary man with a white spot on his forehead. You see that? Okay, so that's golem. Golem basically was a statue made of mud from the river. Rabbi Lev made this big man, clay man, and he animated him with the help of Shem Hamforash. Shem Hamforash was a clay tablet, small clay tablet, squarey, with the secret sacred writings in Hebrew, and when you stuck it under Golem's tongue or in his forehead, Golem actually became alive, and he was supposed to obey the animator. So you can imagine, when the Shem got lost one day, Golem was too dangerous to keep him around. So Rabbi ordered his helpers to hide him somewhere. One of the theories is that he was hidden on the attic on top of the Old-new Synagogue, and Rabbi never got around to design a new Shem because he died in the meantime. So Golem got lost, and we're still looking for him. Okay? The legend actually became a legend much later. The good old rabbi who died in 1609, he was already gone. During the beginning of the 19th century, people started to talk about this. So, but who knows? You never know. This is the little place I talked to you about. Hold on a second. Now it's a beautiful gallery with a Jewish art, but before it was the little store that Freddie, my friend, was in charge of. And this is a place where I did all my homework as a small child, because we became very tight and very close friends. I never met my grandpa, so he became like my substitute grandpa. He survived the Holocaust, he survived Dachau. So I was so fortunate to have met him, and I met several of his friends, survivors, and I heard all the stories. And he was also a historian and a writer and a photographer. So he's really sparked my interest in all of those things, and I'm so grateful I was able to have met him. So hello Freddie, wherever you are. The main artist here, he designed the memorial in Theresienstadt. I will tell you about Theresienstadt in a little bit. And now the gorgeous Mazal Synagogue. Mazal Synagogue. You see the Star of David there. Let me make it bigger. Okay, now you see the original hat. That's the original hat. Obviously, the hat was kind of changing as the decades and centuries went. So later on, the Baroque one looked a little bit more like a crown, but this one is the dunce cap with the pompons. The pointy hat with a pompon. So how come that Mordi could build such a beautiful, expensive building? And as I told you, the town hall and other things, Claussen Synagogue adjacent to the cemetery he built. So how comes? Because he was loaded. He was a moneylender for the palace, and thanks to Rudolf II, who was the Habsburg monarch back then, the emperor, and thanks to his expensive hobbies, and thanks to the fact that the monarch couldn't repay his debt, or didn't want to repay his debt, so he made Mordi his court Jew, which was a position in the court, and basically he was his minister, unofficial minister of finance. So not only that he had even more money, but also he was able to wiggle out some privileges from the monarch to to help his people in the Jewish quarter. So they enjoyed their own golden age here during the second half of the 16th century. Look at this beautiful synagogue, which Mordechai built in 1592. But it didn't look exactly like that. It has been rebuilt many times. So the last version, the beginning, was done during the beginning of the 20th century. Yes, the late 19th, the beginning of the 20th century. I would like to show you, which is a Pinkest Synagogue, not longer active. It became a museum of Holocaust. All right, we are back. So Theresienstadt was not built, it was a fortress ever since 1780s, but it was redone as a ghetto. It was not a concentration camp per se, it was a ghetto without barbed wire. So, since we are talking about the Holocaust, let me show you something here. Right here, you can see those cobblestones, copper cobblestones. There are many of them here. They are commemorating families who perished during the Holocaust. The survivors or the friends, they invested in those, so they are scattered throughout this part of town and also through different cities. Like maybe you saw them in a little bit of technical difficulty here. Sorry about that. You saw them in Dresden, Germany, in Poland and so forth. And this is King Solomon Restaurant, which is a kosher restaurant. It's the oldest kosher restaurant in Prague. It's dating all the way to 1982. I know it's not that old, but in 1982, still dark ages, there was a really heroic gesture to open a kosher restaurant here. Trust me, because the communists were no friends of any religion. And we are getting to the Pinkest Synagogue, which will be the last stop. Pinkest Synagogue has turned to Museum of Holocaust during the 50s. It is a Renaissance building. It was built by a very wealthy man called Mr. Horowitz, who built it as his own synagogue for himself, private synagogue for Rabbi Pinkest. That's why Pinkest Synagogue. It's not longer active. All the covers, all the walls inside are covered by beautiful calligraphy. All the almost 80,000 documented Holocaust victims from my country are commemorated there. Let me show you a little bit more of the building. Okay, almost 80,000 from the entire country, from the entire Czech Republic. They are alphabetically they are in alphabetical order, and also they are after each of the cities listed, yeah, and the cities are also in alphabetical order. You can imagine such a huge building covered by the names. It's very eerie if you go inside. If I tell you 80,000 victims, you say that's a horrible number. But can you imagine if you go inside and you see the entire building covered with the writings? Then you can really visualize how horrible that number is. The middle nave, yeah, let me show you this part. It's the biggest hall there. It's covered by the victims of Prague. So you can imagine more than 44,000 victims of the Holocaust from Prague, more than half of the entire country. So you can imagine how important the Jewish Prague was, the Jewish community in Prague was. It really, really was the center. And thanks to people like Rabbi Lev, like Rabbi Landau, and many, many other scholars, unfortunately I cannot name them all, we have not so much time, Prague really became, and I'm not afraid to say, the center of Judaism of the entire Europe. Why I was actually showing you the place where the restaurant was is this little plaque here on the left side. Yes, on the left side you have a little bronze plaque, and if we go closer you will see a lion there, because Rabbi Lev, or Maharal, and again his real name was Yehuda Liva ben Betzalel, he had many nicknames, and lion was his emblem because of Lev in Yiddish and Lev in Czech means lion. And this plaque is here because the rabbi had a little house on this side here where the restaurant is built, and that's why also I like to come there, because it has such a beautiful atmosphere. You almost feel like the rabbi is still with us. Okay, we would like to think that. His grave is right there, even though he was born in Poland and he came to Prague because again he was administering, he was the rabbi for the Old-new Synagogue, but also he came here because Prague was really not only religious center but also the cultural Jewish center. And if we go straight through this fortification wall, which is the southern side of the cemetery, we would get to his grave. He doesn't have only a grave, he has like a big old tomb there. The entire house. So now we are getting to the end of our short trip. I wish I could spend more time with you. So I would like to answer some questions. There was a question about Kafka. Yes, he was born in Prague and he lived almost his entire life here. He's not buried at the cemetery right there. He's not buried there because the cemetery was active until 1787. Remember, 1787. So Kafka died in 1924 when he was only 41 years old, and he is buried in the new Jewish cemetery in Žižkov. Then there was a question about how many Jewish people are still here, are still in my country, or another question was how big is the community. There is about, I think I mentioned, if not I will repeat it, there is about between 800 to 1,000 members of the Old-new Synagogue, but it doesn't tell you anything anyway, because many of them are foreign, many of them are from US, from Australia, from Canada, even from South America, of course Israel. So there is also the Reform community, and many of the Jewish people are non-practicing. So how would I know? We don't have a census set up that way for obvious reasons, right? The last time we did, you know what happened. So I did a little digging, because that's a question people always ask me. My clients always ask me this, and I don't like to put a number on something I'm not completely sure. So I did some digging, and can you imagine? I found out there was a study made recently. Part of population, the volunteers, sample of population, they were swabbed, and genetic makeup was studied. So you think that we are Slavic country? Yes, we are. We speak Slavic language. Czech is Slavic language, and we should be Slavic mainly. But guess what? Only 30% of people from Czech Republic, they have the strongest genome, the biggest genome, Slavic. 33%, yes, you guessed right, Jewish. So we have many of the people who are genetically Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish, that they don't even know about it. So can you imagine how strong the community was? So 33% Jewish, and the rest. 11% Celtic, because the first inhabitants of my country were Celts of the valley called Bohemia. This happened a long time ago, 3rd century BC. And the rest, Germanic, about 10%, and then Arabic and Asian. Yes, the Genghis Khan, right? The son of a gun. He came all the way down here and he made his mark. So that's another question I read there. And about Theresienstadt, I already mentioned Theresienstadt was built as a fortress. Was built as a fortress by Joseph II and Josephov. Right now, what I'm showing you, it's part of Josephov, because Joseph II, one of the sons of Marie Therese, he emancipated the Jewish community with a tolerance edict in 1781, between 1781 and 1782. You know, it still didn't do anything for the ownership of land, but some of the rules were dropped, like the head and others. Anyway, so as a tribute to him, this part is called Josephov, and my street is a Mazal Street. Remember Mordi, the philanthropist who built so many buildings here? Okay, so Joseph II built Theresienstadt as a fortress to protect my country from Prussian invasion. But that didn't really happen. So the fortress lost its status as a fortress, and it became barracks for the army. And then it became a normal city. Said, okay, we need some concentration camp, which is going to be like a ghetto. It's going to be a city for the Jews, and we can use this as a propaganda for the Red Cross to tell them, oh no, where all the Jewish people were transported from different countries, not only from my country, but from elsewhere, from Denmark, from France. And then from Theresienstadt, they went to their deaths in Dachau, in Ravensbrück, in Treblinka or Auschwitz, and so forth. So there was even a short propaganda film made on the premises, and it was called "The Führer Gifted the Jews Their Town." So you can imagine. So everything was for the sake of the people who were checking. Okay, and now we are back and the cemetery, and we can see this gorgeous ceremonial hall, which looks so grand and old, but it's just grand, it's not old. It was built in 1906, and you can see it's about 3-story building. The top belonged to Chevra Kadisha, burial brotherhood in English, Chevra Kadisha in Hebrew. Those were the members of burial brotherhood. They were performing a sacred tahara, the cleansing of the body, dead body. In the middle floor, you see those 2 arch windows. That's where the tahara room was. And now, obviously, it's not active anymore. It is a part of the museum, and next to it is Claussen Synagogue, which was built by connecting 3 buildings here, and Mordecai Mazal is responsible for that. So Now, again, non-active synagogue. It is a part of the museum with the display of an exposition of a daily life of Jewish communities and customs, Jewish customs, and also holidays. So, thank you so much for staying with me for 45 minutes. I hope you had fun as I did. Let's hope that all this nonsense, this coronavirus will be over soon. Okay, let me say goodbye to you. Love you and hope to see many of you in person when all of this is over. Also, I would like to thank Stay Curious Tours for this initiative to stay curious during the quarantine. I'm so privileged to be working with them, and I would like to thank them for this opportunity they gave me to be your tour guide for this little while. Love everyone. Bye bye.